David Teachout grew up as a Christian fundamentalist, attending a Bible college and receiving a bachelor's degree in theology and psychology. During his studies there, David deconverted. David has a master's in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology and has been working within the field of psychology for almost 20 years. Half of that time on RfRx. I'm just kidding, it's not been that long, but almost. David has worked as a therapist, social worker, consultant, and subject matter expert in psychology. As a therapist, David works with adults and veterans struggling with issues related to trauma, identity, religious trauma, life purpose, and the intersection of values and behavior. David can be found at lifeweavings.com, and his writing can be followed and subscribed to at humanitiesvalues.com. And I'll drop both of those in the chat. And David, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you, Cara. As always, I do believe this might be approaching 20. I think we're right on the cusp of of 20, at which point then I get a hoodie or something. I don't know.
We do have hoodies available at Redbubble. If you search Recovering from
That's
Religion,
true.
you can purchase a hoodie or a t-shirt like this one that says Recovering from Religion, or my hoodie that I
Very nice
sometimes
t-shirt.
also wear, the gray one. Those both came from Redbubble. There you go.
There we are. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So you might get a hoodie.
Yes, and Daryl, I am overdressed. I've been trying to up my fashion game a little bit, but don't worry, I still have sweatpants on. So, this is I just look professional from the waist up. So, basically
Amazing.
it's Zoom professional. I think there really needs to be a category of that. There's professional, semi-professional, Zoom professional. So, yeah. Yeah.
I am here for that. And that is sweatpants and either a suit jacket or like a tank top, and then you have a sweater or something thrown over the back of your chair that you can put on real quick if you
Yep,
need to. That is,
absolutely.
yes. I am also wearing sweatpants, as I do every week for this week.
I mean, what else are you supposed to wear when
Yes.
you're
Oh,
online all the
pajama
time?
pants. Yes, we're
Pajama
also
pants.
being
That's true.
reminded of
That's
that.
true. That's true.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Or
No,
gym
that is fair.
shorts. Gym shorts are also Zoom professional.
It is too rainy and cold right here this second. So
That's
no
because you
sweatpants
live in
unless.
the frozen tundra for some reason.
Usually South Dakota is not that bad. But
Said no one
today,
ever.
the last few days have reminded me of the Pacific Northwest and not in a good way. So it
Mm,
was, yeah, I could do without all the rain. It'd be great, but it's all good.
well,
But
all
yeah,
good.
we're here for even more fun. We're going to talk about trauma, because
Yes.
yay. This is clearly how I get paid. So this is how that works. Um, but
Well, and it's an important topic. This
it
comes
is.
up a lot here, right? We talk about it a
It
lot
does.
because people ask us about it a
Hmm.
lot.
Yep.
And I am excited every time we revisit this topic because I feel like even though I've been, I guess, recovering from religion for decades, and I've been volunteering here for, oh gosh, 5 years. Um, Still, every time we talk about this topic, I think of some fresh new way that I
Mhm.
realize, oh, you know, I'm having that happen, or that's a thought I've noticed, or a feeling that's happened. Look, a new strategy to deal with that. So I cannot wait to hear more.
Well, and thank you for bringing that part up, because this is one of those things where I've been studying it, looking into it, figuring out how to help people through, the variations of how people, personally express, the trauma that they experienced out of that religious experience. And for multiple years now. And every time I kind of, like you, it's like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought it through how this actually worked. And most recently, and that actually spawned this conversation in particular, was the fact that I finally came out with my online class on religious trauma. And the process of creating that was honestly difficult, um, because it required one for me to really kind of sit down and try to uh, instrumentalize or figure out, okay, so here's the things I've been talking about for years. How do I drill, bring them down to some, bite chunk, kind of points. And that's what a lot of what I'm going to be talking about this evening. Obviously, I'm not going to go every single last bit of it because there are literally hours of material in that class. So and I don't have that kind of time. So,
Should
but
I
as far as an
drop the
overview,
link for the
yes,
class?
absolutely. Yes.
All right. Here we go.
And the one of the things that really brought home to me with this time around, and most recently with a lot of studying that I've been doing for the last few months, um, and if not really the last year especially, um, but and that is, and yes, I have been studying because my Goodreads may not necessarily show all the academic stuff that I've been reading, but it
Wait, you don't count your academic reading on Goodreads?
well, so I don't count all of the academic articles that I read because there's no
Okay,
way of putting them on there. So
fair,
yeah,
fair.
if you just follow
Only
me on
full-length
Goodreads,
books.
you're like, wow, he reads a lot of fantasy. And that is true. But yeah, it doesn't take into account the literally hundreds of articles over the last year or so that I read. So it's a little nuts. Um,
Fair.
but yes, so there's a lot that isn't covered just by books. Admittedly, though, I will always come up with a whole list of books that I will recommend to read. And tonight will not be any different for that.
This is why
So
we keep inviting you back, and when I say we, I mean me.
yes, yes. I've actually been approached by a couple of people. They're like, "So, do you have another list?" I mean, there's a reason why I had the resources page here with RFR because yeah, I'm a walking librarian that who is still upset that the Library of Alexandria burned down. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, I heard I don't know if it's a rumor or a claim, perhaps you know the answer to this, that someone said that technically, if you have a certain number of books in your own collection in your home, I think it was something like either 600 or 1,000, it was a large number of books, that technically you could be designated as a library. Do you know if that is true? And do you meet the threshold?
I am pretty certain I do not meet that threshold. I actually just recently donated probably 100 books or so. They were all fiction that I'm just never gonna end up getting around to reading again. But figure there are other people that can appreciate them. So no, I do not. What you see behind you actually is about 90% of what I have. So there might be 100 books there. So
That's fair.
no, do
And
ebooks
I
count? Whew,
ooh.
if they did, I'd be in real trouble. I think I've got like 600 on Kindle. I mean, it's a little
Yeah.
absurd.
I mean,
Yeah,
that is such a huge change, and I'm getting us off topic here, but the advent of ebooks, to me, has made reading so much more accessible. Now, there are some people that are better able to access physical copies, and some people that may be in a situation where they're better able to access the virtual books for various reasons. But as someone who travels all the time, let me tell you, ebooks make it possible to read even when you're not at home and you don't have to
huge.
lug around pounds of
No,
stuff with you.
100%. There are also so many authors that otherwise you'd never find out
Mhm.
simply because the publishing industry is limited, and in particular, in all valid criticisms of Jeff Bezos aside, I love the Kindle Unlimited simply because I get to encounter a whole bunch of people that otherwise you'd never see, and there's some incredible talent out there. So yeah, it's fun.
Absolutely.
It's fun.
Yes. Yeah. The ability to
So
avoid some of the gatekeeping is helpful.
It would be is quite, yes.
Yes.
So
Back on
so
track.
swing it
Okay.
back on track. And yes, we can talk books all night long later on in the hangout. So fundamentally, so we're talking about religious trauma, and or which is, to me, it's a shorthand for trauma that occurred within a religious context. Because for me, I'm very careful about not expanding trauma into uh, more and more iterative notions, simply because it becomes an issue where it's like, well, my trauma is fundamentally different than yours because of where it came out of. And it's like, no, we're all human. We start there. So we start from our biology. We start from our the common, biological nature of which we are human, and then go from there. So with that, looking at trauma then was the initial point of going, okay, what exactly does particularly authoritarian religion and ideologies do that induces a traumatic response? Like what's going on? It's not necessarily just the fact that there's some really bad ideas, because if that was the case, then everybody who read Battlefield Earth would be traumatized. So, it's not obviously just simply the encountering of bad ideas that is an issue. There's a lot more of going on. Sorry for all the, John Travolta fans out there for the terrible movie.
Oh, are there fans of that film or book?
There's some really rabid fans, actually. It's a cult
Oh,
classic
no.
for
Well,
that.
it's
Yeah.
certainly it's something.
It is something. It
Ooh.
is something.
It's worth watching humorously as well,
It's
I would
it's a
say.
drinking game to have
Yes.
your liver fail. It is that, yes. Uh,
It's that. Well, so is the thing that makes it traumatic not Battlefield
mhm.
Earth, but the
Yeah.
the other religious beliefs? Is it that you learn that if you don't accept it, that you're going to, for instance, burn in hell forever or be rejected from everyone who you care about or have some
Mhm.
other kind of torment that you cannot escape?
So yes and no.
Ah,
So we want to differentiate between the content of the belief itself and what beliefs serve as a biological purpose. So beliefs are all about organizing our experiences. They're a means by which we can collate like all of the chaos of our potential experience and everything that our brains and bodies are taking in, and go, here's a nice little cognitive shorthand that we refer to as a belief. And so it's not so much that, to use the Christian example there, of if you don't believe fill in the blank, you're going to burn in hell forever. It's instead more of an issue of that you never understand what it is to look into a future that is predictable. There's, to believe, if to not believe in X, and then here's this like forever consequence, is really tricky for our brains to come up with. And I would actually say that we can't. Like the eternality is not something that we can actually comprehend. And so every time that a belief is predicated and a consequence is based on that, we're effectively gaslighting ourselves. We're effectively saying, sorry, you're just because you can't actually grasp this doesn't matter. You have to give lip service to it. But there's still that like underlying point of going, "Well, but wait a minute, my actions though are incapable of being linked to eternality." Our actions are linked instead to the immediacy of our relationships, the immediacy of consequences that we have, the immediacy of our ethics. To think about them in some kind of eternal sense is to remove ourselves from the human experience. And as a consequence, there is a fundamental problem then in being able to understand how the future is going to unfold, which is why, and you brought it up, in fact, the whole like, do not forsake the assembly. Do not remove yourself from the, the group, because the group allows the creation of an echo chamber so that you don't question the eternal. You just get around a whole bunch of people that are mouthing the same things so that you don't have to question it, because you just, well, no, you don't even have to ask, you get it. You just go, of course you do. Like, it's one of those, the frankly, it's one of the fundamental problems that often happens in like marriage relationships and other forms of intimate relationship, where people will use a term, think that the other person means what they mean by it, even though they don't, but they just kind of go along with it for a while until the differences become such a problem that the behavior based on those differences causes bigger and bigger problems. And that right
Yes.
there is the
Mhm.
problem of religion in a nutshell, is our behavior doesn't actually match. It can't match the kind of dualistic eternality points of this form of religion. And eventually, if you experience enough things that say, wait a minute, this doesn't follow, then the cognitive dissonance is either going to be one, result in you doubling down on belief, or two, it's going to be, well, lead you to an RfRx, where you're talking with, listening to some guy with a massive beard who's going to ask you to, churn butter. So
Eh,
it is what it
Wait, are we churning butter later? Is that
is.
part of this exercise?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh,
But I
okay. So
did
it must be
laugh
a
quite a
different
bit.
RfRx. Okay.
It must be a different one. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, this is making me think immediately of, I don't know if this is may or may not be the term or one of the terms that you had in mind, but as you were talking about people, when they keep using that word, and I don't think it means what you think it means, I'm thinking of one in particular, which is love. I
Hmm.
remember that being a big sticking point. Well, and still is in some conversations that I have with family members who are still religious, where there's this idea of, well, God is love. And to me, the God that is described in, for example, the Old Testament Bible is terrifying. And that doesn't match with what I think of as the term love. And then some
Hmm.
of the behaviors that can be attached to that term, like shunning people if they no longer follow your belief system, or, telling people that, well, because God loves you, he's going to allow you to send yourself to the hell that he created that you can't get out of if you don't believe in him. And that just, I don't think that's what that word means, but I don't know.
Certainly not by any utility that most people are going to attempt applying. I mean, it was
Mhm.
one of the first things that really got to me when smack dab in the middle of Bible college, and looking around at what sin truly means. Because it's not, so much of this goes into like, it's that definitional thing. It's not that words can't mean different things. Okay, fine, you want love to mean that, a very conditional form of it, where if you don't conform to a particular set of actions, it results in eternal torture. Okay, I find that definition rather reprehensible, but thank you for clarifying it. You are not somebody that I will ever apply that word to. So, it's just and that's
Right.
fine, but that's why clarity is so important. It's
Mm.
why, to come back to that, the intimate relationship piece, one of the things I work with clients on so often is going, okay, so you're saying you're this person's, girlfriend or whatever. And it's like, and they use that term. When was the last time the two of you sat down and, hashed out what exactly that meant in practice?
Mhm.
And almost every time, particularly if there are some concerns that have developed, it's, well, I mean, everybody knows, right? I was like, no, no, not everybody, not everybody does.
No. As soon
No.
as I hear that everybody knows, I already know we're about to hear a hot take on something.
We are definitely going to, yes. And so, and that's where we get also into trouble with applying terms to other people when that it's not that the way you define it is necessarily wrong. That is not the point. It's words are references. They're signage that says this is what I'm referring to when I use this. Great. Everybody has to, that's how the words work. But if the other, depending on the degree to which the importance of clarity is in a given situation, we want to really make sure that the internal definitions that are being applied are the same because not least of which when for instance like emotionality and anger, work with a lot of people in anger. It's one thing to be upset, it's quite another when you're using the term, well, actually I'm just a little frustrated, and somebody takes a look at your behavior and goes, you're an enraged beast. It's like you have a lot of issues when it comes to how women predominantly express anger and socially being looked at as come on, or African Americans in particular, will, there's a raised voice, and suddenly in certain cultural situations, it gets assumed that there's a degree of anger involved that was never actually the case. And so, there's that, and yet the same terms are being used, but they're referencing different things. And as a consequence, the behaviors that we end up then exhibiting based on those end up being at cross purposes. And, but that's why clarity is so important. And so that comes right back to the notion of sin. So, predominantly, sin is often referred to as this kind of like missing the mark problem. It's to fall short. Okay, that's fine. And in fact, one second. Um, so actually, recently, my latest Substack article was on this very thing. And so the missing the mark thing is like, okay, fine, that's great. Missing the mark, what is the mark again? What what to fall short of what? Because we like,
Mm.
is this, horseshoes and hand grenades kind of missing the mark? Because yeah, I mean I can get pretty close and I'm still gonna, be just fine. So
But it still
what
it
exactly is going on?
presupposes that someone is determining what the mark is that
Mhm.
you should be achieving.
Right. Yes. And so, um, and what that is to be achieved is going to be different for, it's not that the concept is necessarily bad. For instance, it's because we want to know. I mean, if anybody who's worked in as a machinist, their notion of missing the mark, of getting the fine-tuned measurements down is very different than the person who's like, I did a decent paint job. I mean, it's the 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 detailed degree to which the consequences of that missing is it becomes very, very different. And so we want to know, well, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? And the issue with this kind of religious ideology is that the mark being missed has absolutely nothing to do with your behavior, which is a serious problem when it comes to figuring out how our lives function. Because in every single day occurrence, we are engaging in a, I'm pretty certain that this belief about the world that is going to, be true, and I can act accordingly, and I can error correct if my assumption is a little off. Like that's fundamental, like functionally speaking, that is what our brains are doing all the time. They're like, pretty certain that the world functions this way and I'm going to act accordingly. And when things don't, that's when we go, "Ooh, I need to question a little bit. And maybe I got something wrong. Maybe I didn't see something correctly. Maybe I didn't judge the occasion accurately, and so on. Or maybe I was just flat out lied to. I mean, that's there we are. So the error correction ends up being, well, how do I do better at assessing whether or not this other person is going to be truthful? So all of those things, like that is how we function. We are constantly figuring out the application of a criteria to then determine what we need to do in order to get better at it. Sin doesn't care about any of that. It is literally impossible, according to the usual definition, is that there is nothing you can do behaviorally to all of a sudden hit the mark, because the reality is that this it is a nature thing. It is fundamental to who you are as a human being.
Yeah.
Now, what does that do to us? Like, I mean, when we really, it was one of the things when I was coming out of this is recognizing, like, wait a minute, how do we actually live this dogma? Like in the actual day-to-day activities, you still have parents putting their kids' art on their fridge and going, "This is amazing. I love it." They shouldn't. It's an
Oh, come
expression
on.
of a fallen state. There is literally
Wait,
nothing that a person can do that is, from a divine perspective, legitimate. There's nothing
wait.
good that a human being can do.
I got lost. Like, wait, parents putting their kids' art on their fridge? What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with it. But as a person who, for instance, believes in the inherent fallen nature of a
Oh,
human
I
being,
see. Okay.
there's
If
nothing redeemable here. There's
I
nothing
see.
good. For all have fallen short. All it's not behavior has nothing to do with
Mhm.
it's dismissible. And
It's
so,
that for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God thing. But
yep,
at the same time, yeah, to your point, if the expectation is okay, everyone has a sin nature and everyone needs Jesus to save them because, there's nothing you can do to hit the mark or whatever, it kind of becomes a little bit internally inconsistent because if there's nothing I could possibly do, save God saving me from it, how can I be condemned for not doing it right? How can you
right.
say that God is going to send me to hell for sinning out of one side of your mouth when out of the other side of the mouth you're saying, well, everyone sins and you have to have Jesus to save you? Okay, hold on a minute. I see the same person has created the problem and the punishment for the problem, and we're supposed to worship them or else we'll go to hell. Yeah, I take issue
It's a
with
bit of
that.
it's a well, and be like how then does that work out in practice concerning then when we understand in part of this touches on, I gave a presentation a few weeks ago to the Boston Ethical Society concerning a psychologically informed ethics. And when we start from an understanding of our natural state, our biological history, and go, how do we actively interact with and in a natural environment of which we are in, obviously? And what does that then do? Like, how do we assess, for instance, like many people are fascinated, myself included, by um, by everything from mirages to what was the famous one a couple of years ago with the dress that was either like blue or gold.
Oh, that dress was gold. I will die on that hill.
And here we are. I mean, that's
Yep.
and so we have, and there's a lot of physiological reasons why these things appear differently to different people. And you're not going to be able to go to some, transcendental point to go, this is what's real. Like, no, there, it doesn't work as simply as that. And yet, religious ideology of a particular kind, and by this I'm lumping in, the kind of dualistic fundamentalism, is contrary to how our species literally interacts with the world. And so it's because fundamentally for the sin to exist, our problem is not our behavior. The problem is our humanity. Sin is the only criteria for perfection is divinity. Period. Salvation within particularly the Christian paradigm is basically narcissism. It is divine ego. It is the declaration of deity looking upon your humanity and going, wow, I'm really glad I don't need to see you. Instead, I see myself in the form of, the risen savior. I mean, it's like that's literally what's going on, is that the only way you can look at us in any way that is capable of going, well, I can be with you for eternity, is, well, ultimately I'm just really kind of being with myself. I mean, it's really, when you sit down and figure out, like, wait a minute, how does this actually work in practice? The entirety boils down to a, functional denial of what it means to be human. And there
Oh,
are
how so?
consequences of that. So there are consequences to, for instance, having a criteria for moral judgment that is impossible to reach. There are consequences emotionally, cognitively. So, for instance, well, we can go right to the gaslighting experience. Whoever has been in, for instance, we can start small with the, yearly review at work. And you show up, and the person's like, okay, you didn't meet the standard. And you're like, well, wait a minute. I, your criteria is this, I met that, and yet somehow the result is other. Like,
Oh
wait a
man,
minute.
you're hitting close to home here. I've had this conversation before, and the answer was, well, yes, those are the written criteria that we both agreed to and signed, but I'm not actually grading you off of those. I'm sorry, what?
Right. Yes. Yes.
What are we doing here?
And what ends up happening with that? We get upset, we get uncertain as to how it is we're going to be. Our actions then start changing based on, like, well, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do now?
I'm
How am I
not at
supposed to
all
function?
uncertain about what I'm going to do after that. I am very
Okay, fair
certain
enough.
how I feel about that situation.
Fair enough. So, and no, so now you take that, which is the unfortunately very common experience, and then you say go to a, more intimate relationship where you're like, okay, but you just need to love me. Well, okay, well, how I've done this, that, and the other thing. How, like, what else is there? Oh, you just need to know. I'm going to tell you, but then tomorrow I'm going to change it. Or, which been doing therapy for 20 years. I've heard it all. I mean, so it's the changing dynamics and criteria of, and what ends up happening. We all know we get anxiety. The anxiety leads to depression because we don't really know what it is that what we need to do in order to match up how we see the world, because how we see the world is constantly being told to us is false. Even though we go elsewhere and we're like, yeah, but the criteria is clear here. My thinking isn't off. Like it's not that I'm nuts, even though perhaps the person wants to make me to think so. But and to be thought of as crazy there is basically is what in a divine realm is, well, you're just a sinner.
Right. You can't
Relationally, it's
possibly
the divine version
understand.
of, so yeah, exactly. So the um the difficulty with religious ideology in this way is not just the fact that it's wrong and it's factually incorrect. It is that. It's that I'm not here to, get into some, anti-apologist, debate. Instead, I'm going, okay, well, what is happening then when people leave it and then have these reactions of going, okay, wait a minute. I'm having a hard time figuring out how I relate to myself. I have a hard time relating to other people. What am I even supposed to think concerning ethics, morality, my sense of self? There's a level of uncertainty that ends up developing long before perhaps even having left. It's part of what led to leaving. But now and that's one of the questions from the poll around like that sense of having missed something, that there's something lacking. And like any you know even if it's crazy making, any relationship at least provides some level of structure, and when it's missing, well, we're going to go looking for it. It has nothing, it's not a character flaw. Like I want to be really clear, I want to try to even be very, very clear. The sense in which the felt feeling of going, I've seen this, noted more than once around, I still feel a draw to the old, ideas. I still feel a draw towards the community. I feel as if sometimes, that I'm still missing out. Or, for that matter, something very related, I look back at what I used to believe and I feel shame over having believed something that was fill in the blank, some version of so silly, wrong, stupid, whatever. Like
Well,
I feel bad about having done it.
yeah, and I would take that even a step further and say that I've felt bad not even just about believing something that I now recognize as silly or internally inconsistent or whatever, but believing in something that because of that belief led me to say something to someone else that might have been hurtful or harmful to them, and to try and push that on to other people in a way that was clearly not constructive and not positive,
Mhm.
and not a respectful way to talk to other people. But because I believed that way, I thought that I was doing what I was supposed to do. I thought that that was loving other people.
Right. Yes. And it was in the
Well,
way that, it made sense given the social context and the idea of how you thought the world and its broadness actually functioned. It's this, so much of this is looking at beliefs as in part being truth claims. Okay. But that's a more epistemic, that's a philosophical point that is definitely worth, discussing. And at the same time, though, beliefs serve a psychological point that has very little to do with truth claims. It has to do with providing structure for how we then operate in the world. So, it's yes, there is a place for going, how accurate is this? And then there's a place that says, I don't really care how accurate it is. It makes me feel good. And
And
we
and
all
these
have
are,
been there.
yeah, and these are sometimes thoughts that maybe we're not consciously having, or maybe not like thinking those words to ourselves, right? But we may allow ourselves to continue in these beliefs because of that kind of
Right.
background, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because
And
I don't know very many people who would say that out loud, who would say, "I'm continuing to believe this even though it's obviously ridiculous because it makes me feel good." And
right.
yet, that is probably what is happening in a lot of cases, not just for people's religious beliefs, but for other silly beliefs too. Like, I mean, I'm sitting here arguing with people that the dress is white and gold. Um,
Right.
it doesn't
I mean,
matter.
it doesn't really, yeah, it doesn't matter. And that's just an issue of how visual cortex works. You start adding in eternal damnation, like, oh my gosh, like the cosmic significance. Suddenly the so-called answers to some of these questions become, well, commensurately as important. And so the um moving on from a structure like that, moving on from that kind of authoritarian, very clear to a point ideology, can feel like something is missing, in which I would actually look at as being a form of grief. That there is a loss that has happened that sometimes may feel like a missing piece or a missing limb, or for that matter, the grief that comes from having lost a person. You know, and often will describe grief as it doesn't have has very little to do with the present, it has everything to do with a future that will no longer happen. When we grieve, we are we are sad over all the things that will no longer happen. We are upset over the fact that the future we thought was going to be real cannot be. That's that sense of loss when we challenge belief systems and when we leave them behind. We thought the world functioned this way and we had a future. Now, what? What am I supposed to do with this? How does the world make any sense to me? Which is why, and this was impressed upon me. I forget who. This is years ago. Around, it is not enough to undermine a person's belief. You have to be ready and willing to offer an alternative, even if it's only as a means of going, here is something else to consider. Not going to leave you just hanging with this, like, well, the world went to shit. I'm that way. It's like this is not helpful to I think, in fact, a appreciation for our humanity. When we take something, we want to be able to provide an alternative. And that's where so in here and in my class, the point isn't to undermine belief itself. It's not getting into the nitpicky of dogma. It's certainly not going to, look into everything from Aquinas and Augustine to Tertullian and so on. Like, this is not some, like, we really need to figure out like why these beliefs are false. No, the point here is to go, you're feeling this sense of loss, you're experiencing some uncertainty about what to do going forward, here's an alternative. And the alternative is, I think, some form of humanism that celebrates, like the description of today's talk was, celebrates our humanity rather than dismissing or shaming it. So rather than what sin says, that the fundamental problem of us is our very human nature, it is in fact the inverse, that our very human nature is where we are going to find success and meaning and purpose and morality. We just have to spend some time figuring that out.
I would love to interject here with an insightful question, but I'm arguing with people in the chat about the dress still.
That's
I'm
awesome. I know
being
I keep
I'm
getting
being
distracted a little bit by
told.
the dress conversation.
I know I'm being told that in real life, allegedly, the dress was blue and black, but in the photograph, it's white and gold. Okay.
Context is so much. It very much is.
Okay. So how do we deal with this though? I mean, I
Mhm.
feel like the reason you brought that up was because that is a little bit of an accessible kind of argument to talk about where people are perceiving things in different
Yes.
ways. Bring us back here. What do we do
Yes.
with this?
So
How do
for
we
instance,
recover?
yes. So so for me, I break down some fundamental questions around, for instance, are my thoughts still a problem? That's actually lesson one. The religious principle says your thoughts are the same moral value as your actions. That there's that whole, if you even think about adultery, you have committed it in your heart. Like, but wait, I am pretty certain that that's not true.
Can I tell you a
So,
story about the first time I got in big trouble at school in the first grade?
oh no.
It was a church school. It was a fundamentalist. It was Assemblies of God. They had like
Mhm.
speaking in tongues and exorcisms, and they would slay people in the spirit and
Oh yeah.
everything. Which, if people don't know, that's where like the pastor or the associate pastor or some random person in a suit like runs up to you and like thrusts their hand at your face suddenly, and you're supposed to fall down. But if you don't, they will push you. But, and this
Yeah,
is
if you don't fall down in the way that they want you to, you will be put down.
you will fall down
Yes.
whether God does it or someone pushes you or you fall down yourself. But anyway, one of the first time I got really in trouble at school, and listen, I was one of those kids that would ask questions when it was not the appropriate time to do so, and I would take things literally when it was not the appropriate time to do so. And we were told at one point, there is no talking during this period of the lunchtime because you're supposed to be eating your food and not talking or whatever. And repeat after me, I will not talk for the first however many minutes, blah blah blah. And then there was this one part of the thing we were supposed to say, which was that if you even think about talking, you're going to be, I don't know, some punishment. You were going to go to timeout or miss recess or something. And any questions? And we all as adults know that when someone tells you in these hyperbolic terms a bunch of rules and then says any questions, they are not, in fact, inviting you to ask a question. But
No, it's very much rhetorical.
6-year old Kara did not understand that kind of rhetorical question. So I immediately raised my hand, just like I always did when people asked if there were any questions. I was like, I have a question. And they were like, yes, Kara, what's your question? And I said, how can you threaten us with punishment for thinking about talking when you don't know what I'm thinking? And guess what? I
You
got
got
put
punished.
in timeout for that question. And they had
Yep.
invited me to ask that question first of all, but yes, this I believe to this day this was the beginning of my unraveling of the faith, where I was
Hmm.
like, wait a second, what's going on with this thought crime business anyway?
Well, and thought. So I mean, thought crime here. Like, there's a reason why I start with that first lesson. There is that it's so clearly antithetical to how the human experience actually is. Like, we just know that you can think things and not get in trouble for it. That, in fact, the actual doing of something is morally and functionally far worse than thinking it. Like, we just know that. And so the idea of being judged, the idea of saying any potential thought that could possibly and pop up into your head, of which you have zero control over, by the way, but they're just there, and you are now morally condemned to the same degree as if you had actually acted on it, is like, it makes, like, it's crazy making. It literally is a denial of how we go about our lives in a day-to-day, experience. And so the humanistic principle, I think, to counter that is that, guess what? You aren't your thoughts. You can have a million of them a day. The vast majority of them you will not remember, and they have almost nothing to do with how you're going to show up. They're just there, and it's okay. Your thoughts aren't magic. They're not, connecting you to some kind of divine, chess game. They're just the meandering pop-ups of a biological system that's trying to make sense out of the overwhelmingness of reality. Okay, like, it's all right. We can have fun with it. I can think silly things. I can think things that I'm going to do anyway. I can sit here or stand here, as the case may be, and go, I'm not going to lift my left arm. And guess what? My left arm is lifting, even as I have the thought that says otherwise. Thoughts are just that. They're just thoughts. They are part of the experience, but they are not the whole of it. And certainly, we are not going to sit around, hopefully, and condemn other people. And perhaps even, and here's the other thing, ourselves, for just simply having a thought. We're not Job, who
Yeah.
ultimately was condemned for bad thinking.
Well, after or during the time that he was, being used as a pawn in some elaborate um, poker game amongst the gods to see who had better control over him, I find that whole book to be objectionable in a number of ways. Uh, but I guess it's only objectionable if you think that human life matters, which I personally do. Perhaps the authors of that book did not. But I mean, this kind of gets at one of those major kind of areas where I think people run into some difficulty or some challenge as they're leaving religion, right? Because for a lot of people, um, they had similar leaders in their church as my, first grade teacher at the Assemblies of God school, that did teach them that if you think something, not only does it mean something bad about you, not only is it the same thing as having done that thing, but also you are subject to punishment for it. You should feel shame. You should feel guilt. Everything you are doing is bad. But you're mentioning something important here, right? Which is that people have all kinds of thoughts that,
All the time.
right.
And
And
in fact, one of the ways to counter, to move on from that kind of hanging on of the ideas, from religion, is to actively, so every single lesson that I have comes with a practice to do. And the practice for this one is to actively look at how often your thoughts have almost nothing to do with what you're doing. In fact, play around with it. Acknowledge the fact that, I mean, I had somebody once I worked with, this was a while back, around fear of hell, and particularly the flames, and going, I'm going to burn for eternity. And this over the course of a while. But we got to the point of being able to have actually fun with the fires of hell, to imagine them as waving lines of cotton candy that were totally edible. Like, so you're sitting in damnation going, that smells like sugar. I Oh, nice. The fires of hell are actually pretty darn tasty. I mean, it's like you start having fun with the fact that our brains can come up with nonsense. And that isn't a bad thing. It's actually a testament to our imaginative capacity to create art, to create buildings, to go out and figure out, okay, I'm going to take a picture of this, but then I'm going to run the picture through any number of varying programs and have it come up and look a little differently. Like the there was a comment actually in the chat around like the capacity for error by looking at it as sin takes away from us our ability to learn and grow. By declaring that our thoughts themselves are the moral equivalent of an action, it is taken away from us the very thing that we have done to be able to go, I can think of 100 different scenarios. And the nice thing about it is that they're not the same consequences as the doing. And therefore, I can learn and maybe not make the same mistakes again. Religious dogma would say, no, no, that's everything you just did is the moral equivalent. So you're fundamentally wrong there. Everything you just did is bad.
And this kind of gets to also kind of this way of preventing people from doing too much thinking or from admitting to it in any case, right? Because if you
Right.
think of something that might make you doubt the faith or question something that you've been taught, if you have already been taught to believe that that is a sin and to be fearful of that because it's going to send you to hell, because thinking in your mind that you doubt is basically the same thing as blasphemy or whatever the case may be, then this is a very powerful tool for stopping people from even considering alternatives, right?
Yep.
And
100%. Which is why authoritarianism, beyond a religious context, is so important. Is so preoccupied with how people express themselves.
mm,
It's
yes.
why you have art get curtailed. It's why you have political expression curtailed, because any variation must there is missing the mark from the perfection that the authority figure of whatever kind has declared to be correct. Anytime we get into thought crimes of some form, we've got a problem of whatever for whatever whoever it is saying that. Like, it doesn't matter who where you're coming from. It's like when you've taken over and said the very nature of how we interact with the world is somehow wrong. Well, at that point, you don't have anything. There's no humanity left. There's only the absence of it. And there's going to be some serious problems mental health wise that come out of that.
Mm. And whether or not that's the intention, I'm sure we can argue that all day long. I suspect it might be. But what can people do if they find themselves in this space where, like, I, for example, spent a few years in the space where I didn't believe any of this anymore. I found it to be offensive, and I did not believe it. I had never. I had believed it in the sense that I was taught that it was the only option and, thinking otherwise was a thought crime, but I had come to the conclusion that I did not, in fact, believe it. But I still had that sort of internalized fear where, like, well, but if I were to verbalize that, if I were to say out loud that I don't believe, I'm going to go to hell. And even though I didn't think that was true, I still experienced that fear when I went to say it. I had like my heart, I could feel my heart beating faster. I could feel
Mhm.
my face flushing. Like I was worried about it, even though what I was trying to say out of my mouth was that I did not in fact believe that was true, but the two things weren't matching up. What do people do when they're in that space to kind of work through that?
Well, part of it is, there in in the comment, there's question concerning, oh, so this is kind of like, one of the practices is mindfulness. Yeah, partly. But mindfulness in the sense of um, holding thoughts lightly, which is very much an acceptance commitment therapy, principle, and it's recognizing that our brains are simply trying to make sense of an overwhelming existence, and that error correction is not something to be afraid of. It is, in fact, what it means to be human. Flexibility in the face of uncertainty is truly where freedom exists. Contrary to the notion of sin, where error is some kind of a indication of our failure, error, properly understood from a human perspective, is actually a declaration that we are actively interacting with reality, and how much fun can we have with this? Like, oh, okay, well, I missed that. Sweet. Now what? Like, what am I able to learn from this? What am I able to, like, I understood the world to be this way, and I was wrong to some degree. Freaking A. Hell yeah, let's do this. Let's figure out where it was and how things changed. And maybe I didn't, see this correctly. Maybe I get to have more dialogue. I mean, that was why I asked the question of the poll around how often do you engage with contrary perspectives?
Mm-hmm.
And the, of course, by this, I try to mean the best version of contrary perspectives. The this is not about, to keep it
The
within
flat
religious
Earth
example.
society.
Yeah, I mean, they're like, come on, we're the silly cults and so on. They're low hanging fruit. Like, let's frankly do better. Um, there are some really thoughtful writers and thinkers who are very much opposite of what many people here, may think. Engage, figure it out, because I can guarantee you that at some level there's probably a nuance somewhere. You're like, I hadn't really thought about it that way. Huh.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, like, even if I still may think that I am accurate, broadly speaking, I need to sit back a little bit and maybe, figure out how this might work out in practice. Like, how does this actually, it's like, rather than just operating here, that I want this to happen, how does it work here? I can
Mhm.
say to my partner all day long, like, I love you. Great, say it. Definitely a good thing to do. But if it's not followed up with actions that are mutually appreciated, when you haven't really done much. If we want to, look at how do practices, policy wise, if we start going, well, I really want this outcome, great. How are we going to get there? Do we get there by some kind of authoritative fiat? Thank you, the orange turd. Or do we get, do we get there by iterative things that may not feel great, but because they're not happening immediately, but at the very least, they're not breaking everything and causing more problems than, than they help. So, there are a lot of things here without getting into a whole lot of trouble and, with a bunch of examples, and that we can
Oh, do tell.
challenge. No, so that's for the hangout.
Ooh,
So
stick
yeah,
around for the hangout, y'all, for the juicy
sticking out for the
examples.
hangout. Yes. So there's any number of things that how we view the world. So for instance, one of the books that I recommend, that going through currently myself actually, is Brian Lowry's book, Selfless. And there are, I mean, within the first few chapters, there's already multiple occasions where it's like, ooh, okay, I still kind of, thought this way, still kind of, looked at the nature of the self in a particular way that was frankly rather magical. Even if somebody were to come out and point it out, it'd be like, okay, wait a minute. But there were still some errors in how things were applying from a deeper appreciation of biology. So it's like, okay, well, here we are. This is workable. Again, challenge. Whenever you feel uncertainty, it is not a sign of your loss. It is not a sign of your sin nature. It's a sign that you're actively engaging in reality. Come along. Let's figure this out together, because that's what we are, is a species. We're not an individual, we are a group figuring stuff out together to go, how do we make things just a little bit better than last time, and a little bit better than last time, and a little bit better than last time. And we do that by acknowledging the things that we didn't quite get the first time around, or the second time, or the third or fourth or fifth. We just keep going. And part of leaving religion behind is to acknowledge and really deeply more appreciate what it means to be that biological creature figuring stuff out as we go. That we don't have the immediacy of the answers right away. We're trying to figure this out. And what answers we may have had 100 years ago are is going to look a little different now. And it's likely going to look a little different 100 years from now, hopefully. So we want that change.
Mhm. So we've got a comment in the chat that I think other people may kind of identify with, or I certainly can relate to. Someone is saying being taught that human nature is inherently defective, and therefore
Mhm.
music, poetry, secular writing, and especially pleasure are inherently empty and soulless and not worth our time is immensely difficult to unlearn. Now, that resonates with me. I remember specifically learning that, in fact, there's a lot of language in, some faiths that people learn, which is that if it feels good, it's bad. If you're liking it, you're sinning.
Yep.
How how do we square that, especially for people who may, in other areas of their life, engage in a lot of selfless acts or feel compelled to be selfless in a virtuous kind of way? Um, how can people unlearn that kind of automatic feeling that, oh, it must be bad. I like it. It's wrong. I'm awful.
Or probably a couple of steps here. One is to, give yourself enough grace. And yes, I think we can use the term grace outside of a religious context. But give yourself enough grace to go, I don't actually think that all the time. That perhaps, that there are moments where I do feel good about something, and maybe it's only a little good. It's not ecstasy, it's just a little good. And if a little good is okay, well, maybe a little bit more is okay. Like, at what point is feeling positive wrong? Like, this is where criteria can be get into the nitty gritty details. Like, if all that is feels good out of humanity is wrong, this is why I bring up the absurd example of the kids and art and being on the fridge, because we literally can't live that way. It's not possible to live in a way that says every creative impulse out of humanity is wrong. We can't do it. And so part of figuring out that we've left this behind is to realize that really, in some ways, we were never in it. It's the old question of like, when we deconvert, I need to start over from scratch. I need to figure out everything anew. And my point is, no, you don't, because it was never true to begin with. God never existed. The morality that you thought you got from him, it whatever, never existed because he never did. So the morality that you've been doing, the decisions you've been making, have been based on our humanity all along. You don't have to start over. You just have to go, huh, well, that's not how I want to, do things anymore. But maybe there's, certain aspects of it that I like and something, most of it I'm going to get rid of. But, how do I go about it? We don't have to fight against the myth. We instead continue to engage with the fact that we never lost our humanity, that this was simply one iteration of error, and now we're going to move on to the next one. Okay, great. It doesn't have to be larger than life. That's actually still assuming some vestige of the claim that religion was making in the first place, that what we do is cosmically significant. No, it's not. It never was, and that's okay. It really is. It's okay to look back and go, yeah, missed that one. Let's move on to the next mistake and see what I can do with the next version of this.
We can get excited about making new mistakes because that means we're learning more, right?
Right. 100%. Yeah.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Bring us on home. What else can we do? Uh, lay on your recommendations and the book list.
Well, the book list is should be in the Google Doc as well.
It
Um,
is. I've
uh,
seen it. I was trying to build anticipation.
okay. So there are multiple books as well by Phil Zuckerman. In fact, here's one. Literally, I can just reach back to my library. Faith No More is one. Why People
Ooh.
Reject Religion. A bit of a more of a he's a sociologist, so he definitely takes things from that research perspective. Um, a little more academically minded, but definitely good. Living the Secular Life is another one by Zuckerman that is, a bit more of a, that kind of like, here are some principles to figure stuff out by. Um, Obviously, I'm gonna, end up creating my own class, of course. But one of the practices that I mention at the end is like, okay, so if flexibility, if engaging in error is truly the healthy cornerstone of what it means to be human, then go out there and try some new stuff. Read a book in a genre that wasn't all in that wasn't enticing before. Start a hobby. Figure out like, go to I don't know, one of those barbecue glasses at Lowe's or something. I don't know. I mean, it's just like go to a place that you haven't been before, even if it's especially in fact, if it's in your own city or town, to acknowledge the fact that we are always limited and that to be less so means actively engaging with life. And that's ultimately what, in fact, I think somebody even mentioned in the comics around like, this is why the authoritarian says, do not leave. This is why the authoritarian says you have to dress this way, you have to think this way, you have to talk this way, you have to, act this way. Because any variation away from that is an acknowledgement that their authority is not absolute. It's just not. that it's pure egoistic hubris bullshit that they, through a lot of mechanisms, had you believing for a while. It's okay. Welcome to the club. But guess what? The world is out there. We can go out and see it, even as the little bits of going, turning around and going, oh, I never saw that part of the room before. It sounds a little silly, but at the same time, like, it's one of the things I do with people when I'm doing like walking therapy, or leading hikes, is going, pause for a moment on anywhere you're at on the trail, whatever it may be, look at something that's obvious, but then look again and see what may have been missed initially. What was, how did was there a leaf perhaps that was a little wonky that may have been bitten by a caterpillar and you didn't really notice it right away? How did you know, the water coming off of a tree, flow? Did it flow a little differently here? All of a sudden, I've got Jurassic Park scene in my head with Jeff Goldblum, where he was totally hitting on the woman, where he's just like, chaos theory, and the water trickles this way down your down your fingers, and she's like, oh, this is fascinating, completely missing the fact that he was flirting. Yeah.
I completely missed that fact for years. I've seen that movie a bunch of times, and it took me a long time to figure that out too. Uh, I'm sure
Yep.
that's happened in real life as well, but who knows?
Eh,
It may not have. Uh,
I mean,
you know what? Jeff Goldblum has never flirted with me in real life, in fact.
I would like Jeff Goldblum to flirt with me.
I
Yes.
know it. It has not happened yet,
It has
nor
not
has he
happened yet. Yes.
explained the mysteries of life. Either one. I'd be happy for either. Um, yeah. So so basically experiencing reality in a different way without
Mhm.
feeling that we have to be staying inside of the box that we initially were shown, right? And
Yep.
I guess that sounds a little cliche. Oh, think outside of the box. But actually, what you're talking about is, recognizing that you may have heard that there were not any alternatives, but there are, and you can easily see them
Mhm. And
if
you've
you're
been
not
living
worried
them.
about thought crime.
Right. And the
Yeah.
reality is you've been living them all along. Like, I mean, it's really, it's one of the most pernicious pieces around authoritarianism in its various forms, is that it gets us to deny our actual experiences. The fact that we even have them. The fact that every moment of every day is basically a ginormous natural middle finger to limitation. Like, it is
Yes.
the sheer enormity of what we can experience at any given moment is mind-boggling. And that itself is, now, admittedly, it can result in a little bit of anxiety, hence why we like control. It's one of the reasons why you get kids early in this kinds of thinking, because they want to go all over the place, and you want to tell them, well, here's the bad is out there, and we're going to give you safety. And then we get older and we realize the bad does exist sometimes out there, and we want safety. And so it makes it easier to then go, well, I've been told this was safe all along, so I'm going to stick with it. It makes sense in that
Yeah.
way.
From a certain point of view.
Right. I mean, it's not a big surprise that the abdication of freedom is a fundamental part of, or a tendency that all people have. We like our simplicity. We like when things simply make sense. We feel uncertain and anxious when we encounter something that doesn't quite fit. What I'm saying is that's actually a good thing.
So
That
when we
that
feel that uncomfortable uncertainty, like, ooh, I'm getting a little bit outside of what seems like the thing I should do. You're saying we should lean into that.
To a point. Now, obviously, I'm not, denying, if you're feeling uncertain about stepping out in front of traffic, this is not a good thing. But there's
Right.
a
We're talking
point
like
at which,
philosophically speaking.
yes, and more ideas. Just having fun with the fact that we can imagine any number of things. Having fun with the fact that what comes up in our heads does not, in fact, have the same consequences as actively acting on them. And how free is that? We can
Uh,
play around and it's okay.
I kind of like that. Um, it's reminding me of the Alice in Wonderland. I can think of, at least six impossible things before breakfast. I
Before
love it.
breakfast. Love that line. One of my
Yes.
favorites. It's
It is.
absolutely because we can. I mean, I can
Yeah.
think of, inverted elephants and, purple giraffes. Like, I mean, it's so, it, the brain is an amazing thing, and the human experience of, what's the, Sagan alluded to it, others have made various versions of this statement, but it's like we're the universe thinking of itself. We're the
Hmm.
one thing that in our conscious experience goes, huh, I can actively contemplate the fact that, that there's change all the time, and that can actually be a really, really fun thing, and then share
Yeah.
it.
Well, right. And it reminds me a little bit of the conversation we had last week with Nathan Lentz about sex and gender diversity in the animal world. We've spent many of us have learned for decades, oh, well, this is just the way it is. This is what's natural. Nature and all of the animals in it follow God's plan for a heterosexual, monogamous, nuclear family, reproductive relationship. And that's the only time they have sex. And turns out that is not remotely accurate at all.
Yep.
But
Yep.
if you're told, well, this is natural, well, let's imagine if it wasn't. And oh, by the way, if we step outside our door, we'll notice that that's the case.
That's not entirely yeah. Was it as a
Yeah,
comedian recently I saw that was around like, sex is for reproduction. He's like, we know that's not true.
right.
Like, that's
No,
that's like a little bit of it.
right. That can happen.
It can happen, but it's not the
not
only thing.
it's not the only thing.
It's not the yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And so I am now reminded that we need to look at our poll questions. But
Mm.
before we go to that, is there anything else you want to tell us on this topic before we move to the questions, the poll questions, that is?
Really, just reiterate the last point. Go out and have fun. Even
Yes.
when, or especially when, there is that accompanying thought from old thinking that says, "Oh, this could be a problem." Lean into it. It's okay. We can have thoughts. Like that's the power of recognizing that we are not just our thoughts. We can have ones that are nonsensical bullshit. It's okay. We don't have to believe every single thing that pops up into our heads. Thankfully, we don't. Because I don't know about you, but I've got any number of thoughts about my own self judgment that I just assume not actually take as real. Like, it's okay.
Yes, I have some thoughts that I am sometimes glad for my friends to tell me, Kara, that's not accurate.
It's not. Yep.
And I appreciate that.
Yes. Yes. Very much so.
Okay, well, let's talk about some other thoughts that people had about our poll questions.
Mm,
So, and I say this because we have answered most of the actual questions that people typed in as we went along. If anybody has another burning question that they want to get in before the hangout, now is the time. But otherwise, we'll address them in the hangout. But we've got to talk about these poll questions. So
we do.
we asked, do you need religion in order to be moral? And, again, we're not polling the general population. We're polling the folks who came to this episode of RfRx, but
Yeah.
3% of people said yes. Yes, you do. And 68% of people said no. 26% of people said clearly not, and 3% of people are like, David, why did you ask us this question? Read the room.
Read the room.
Yeah. And so a lot of people here said no, but I know that if you were to go out, or I suspect that if you were to go out and poll the general population, a lot of people might say yes. A lot of people have
Mhm.
probably been told, yes, you do, and may not have thought of any other framework in which you could be moral without it, or may even equate religion with morality. Like morality means that you follow a particular religious path. Um, what would you say to that?
I would say, great. Where does this lead? This is one of those where I'm far less concerned about whether or not somebody happens to hold a belief in a deity, or at least a stated belief in it, and much more of, and what does that belief tell you on how to treat yourself and others? That's really what I'm far more interested in. Not least of which, frankly, I think belief in a deity is more about, was a is a Peter Boghossian coined the phrase belief in a belief years ago,
Mhm.
where it's like there are some beliefs that really aren't about, again, they're like I mentioned almost at the very beginning, beliefs hold two forms. One, they may or may not be a truth claim, and they hold a psychological weight that usually is about, um, connecting with the continuity of how we think the world functions, and more often, connection we have with a group. Like, really, to say that I believe in God is really a I belong to this group over here. It's like that's really what the person is meaning by it. It's don't worry, I'm part of this, which is really, I think, where the moral question is. If you were really to figure out, like, so where exactly in your religious text does it say to do da, 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 da? I'm like, wow, I and it doesn't exist. Why? Because ultimately, to say that you get your morality from your faith is to ultimately say, I listen to the people I agree with, and this is what we've collectively understood as being, good to do. That's really what's going on here. And in that case, well, welcome to the rest of us. Now we get to have a dialogue as to whether or not, we that's how we want things to be.
Right. We can all read the Bible through the lens of what we view as moral or ethical, and we're going to all pick different bits and pieces out of it that may reflect that. But
Hmm.
I bet none of us are going to read the entire Bible or some other religious text and go, "Yep, every single word of this, I'm going to do it all." I
Yep.
challenge anyone to say that they would do that without coming back and saying, oh well, no, 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 upon a closer reading, if you study it further, you know that we don't have to do those 36 books of it because of X, Y, and Z reason, or they didn't really mean that there, or that doesn't
Hmm.
really apply now. Oh really, why not? Because you decided it didn't. Because you decided that it wouldn't be moral if it did, and it has to be moral so it doesn't. Okay, yeah, we're renegotiating it. Okay. So, next question. Have you ever felt like something was missing after leaving religion? And 14% of people said yes, 41% said no, 32% said sometimes, and 14% said yes, and it's frustrating. Interestingly, no one said not applicable. So, I guess everyone here has at some point left a religious faith, but actually the no's were a minority. Only 41% of people said no. Everyone else had some variation on
Hmm.
yes or sometimes. That's a pretty high amount, right?
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I think that's a healthy response. And
Ooh, how
because
so?
the reality is if you've left something that meant that much to you, yeah, I mean, let's not deny the fact that this, to some degree, may have even helped. shoot, certain I can think of certain situations that I didn't engage with growing up, precisely because it went away at the time at my against my understanding of what it meant to be a good Christian boy. Like,
Uh-huh.
and guess what? It was in hindsight a really good thing that I didn't do it. So, whether just because the what that morality pointed to, this is what I mentioned earlier around, it's always been our humanity and us making these decisions all along. God
Mhm.
never existed back then. He doesn't exist now. So just because I happen to think so, and that was an error, doesn't change the fact that at the time it was helpful. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's totally fine. I just think that obviously it's not what we want to continue. But to ignore some of the things that may have been helpful, I don't think that's at all, good to do. Like, all right.
Yeah. You can keep the parts that help you, right? Like,
Mhm.
those were probably values that you hold regardless of that faith, I imagine. And
Yep.
there's nothing stopping you from continuing to have those values.
You cared about honesty then. I'm sure you still care about honesty now.
Yeah. Okay, so next question. We asked, how often do you engage with material outside of your perspective? And it looks like people in this group largely are doing that. 33% said
Awesome.
often, 56% said sometimes, 6% said rarely. We did have 3% of people say others are wrong. Why would I engage with them? Or I'm not sure where or how to start. So why you kind of spoke on this earlier, but just real
Mhm.
briefly, um, what is your position on engaging with material outside of your perspective?
Do it often.
Do it often.
I mean, that can point to any number of things. But I mean, it's so one book that I often will, and I didn't this time, but often will recommend is Being Wrong, Adventures on the Margins of Error. And um the and it really is that kind of like, it's a recognition of the fact that at no point are we ever 100% accurate in anything we think. There's always some variation that we could change on. Great. Now it doesn't mean, there's skepticism as a lived philosophy, and then you can spend all your time going, I can't think anything. One, nobody's going to do that, so it's really not too much of a worried about that. But it's just that it's that epistemic humility as a principle of recognizing, you know what, I'm probably missing something here, and that's a good thing.
Mhm.
And engaging in thoughtful, yeah, in the comment being, yes, to define engage with, to your own degree of capacity. You know, it's one of those where, you know, um, I will even recently, I've had to curtail a little bit of how often we'll read, certain sources, in order to kind of wrestle with different ideas, simply because I was just really freaking tired. I was just a little
Yeah.
overwhelmed. So I have to recognize my own limits. And other
Mhm.
people's limits are going to be different as well. This isn't, go out and debate every single person out there.
Oh
This
gosh.
is when able to go, I haven't looked into this a bit more. That might be, something about that. Yeah, trollish comments on Christian YouTube videos. Um, why? Uh,
I'm
there's
I'm
so
gonna
many
go out
better
on a
things to
limb
do.
here and say maybe don't engage with any comments on YouTube videos. I mean, that's not for me. I know people that thrive on that. I don't.
I don't, yeah, it's one of those, and this is where, from the very beginning of like, how we engage. is telling us how we think the world is. And when we're constantly, I mean, this is one of the reasons why to leave Twitter, or in fact, most social media, is like when you're surrounded by garbage all the time, you tend to then think that everything is garbage. And it's not. So, but we have to recognize that we've made an error in our assessment, that we were so close to one source of information and one small percentage of humanity that we forgot the fact that there's a whole lot more people out there than what happens to be assholes on Twitter. So, yeah.
That's true. And we now collect the trollish comments for our Festivus episodes of RfRx, where we have the airing of grievances and we get to laugh about them, but not take them too seriously.
Don't take them too seriously. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it is time to wrap up. We do have one final poll question, though, that I hope we'll get to talk about in the Hangout, which is what's your favorite sci-fi book series? And I'll give the results. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that 69% of people selected something other than the answer choices we provided, and not one single person picked my favorite sci-fi series, The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, even though I invited anyone to click that button, but no one did, and that's fine because we want you to tell us your favorite series. Mine is that. But 7% of people selected Dune. 3% selected Foundation by Isaac Asimov, 7% The Broken Earth series, 3% The Expanse, 10% for The Dragon Riders of Pern. And I remember now, back when I was a kid, my secular uncle, who I now know is secular, we didn't know at the time, gave me that book when, I was young and in a very fundy family. So I have a particular affinity for that one too.
Mhm.
And yeah, everybody else said others. So in the Hangout, stick around and tell us. I mean, or in the chat too, but also let's do it in the Hangout. Tell us your favorite. David, which is your favorite?
Ooh, I definitely do come back to Dune. I've read the whole series multiple times, and every single time I have different thoughts. But Foundation is amazing, and the Apple TV adaptation of it is incredible. As
Fair.
is the
The
Murderbot series,
Murderbot
also Apple
Diaries.
TV. In the adaptation there is really, really good.
I didn't know until you told me like 2 days ago that that was already out, and I cannot wait. I cannot wait. I am so excited for that. I love that series. I'm like vaguely worried that they're gonna like portray it differently than I have imagined it, but it's okay. I'll survive. It'll be okay to see another perspective that is not
It's
mine.
okay. Right.
All right. Well, let's leave that there and move on to wrap up so we can go to the Hangout. Don't forget to check out David's new course on life weavings. I'm going to drop that in the chat if you want to learn more about reclaiming your life after leaving religion. I'm trying to click the chat here and Discord keeps popping up. Okay, there we go. Got it. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, David, for sharing with us and for joining us this week and for dressing up in your nice suit. Love it. And look forward to next week. We have Dr. Daryl Ray speaking with us next week about masturbation, the topic about which he spoke at the secular sexuality conference recently. So definitely join us for that. It's going to be a good time as always. And don't forget to follow us on the social medias. It really helps other people find us and access our resources. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and of course, YouTube. So find, like, subscribe, follow on any of those. And don't forget that you can also volunteer here. We have learned that healing can also come from helping others, and many of our volunteers do find meaning and purpose by volunteering with us. We are always in need of new volunteers, or I should say additional volunteers, to help us provide all of these services that we talked about earlier in the show. And it can be things from answering the helplines to moderating the online community to IT support to helping us find those resources that we refer people to, all sorts of things. If you have a skill and you have time to share, check us out. Go to recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer and you can fill out an application. And don't forget, there's also a video on YouTube called RfR, What We Do, that explains in 3 minutes what it took me 20 minutes to explain at the beginning of the show. So if you want to share succinctly with people about what we do here, that's a good place to start. And with that, I want to turn it over to Dr. Ray and the lovely canine companion that is assisting him today, Daryl, who is our special guest here.
Well,
And
this is the Queen of Sheba, and I can't possibly not, do my duty to the Queen. I'm at Gail's house, Gail and Elliot's house this weekend, and I'm learning that they really abuse their dogs, and there's no love here for dogs. So I have to fulfill it for like the next year or two till I come back the next time. Yeah, it's really sad. All these sad dogs that never
it's a
get any
tough
loving or any
job.
attention. I
Somebody's got to
know.
do it.
But Sheba has decided that I'm not allowed to even get up, go to the bathroom. David, thank you again for a great presentation, and boy, a whole lot to think about as usual. I really like the notion, and I totally agree with you on that. The fact that when you leave religion, it's a loss, and it's a loss like any other loss. So I won't repeat what you said, but I really feel like there's some grief process that goes on there, and I think that one of the things I would say is that loss and what to replace that loss with is why RFR exists. We're here to try to help people replace that loss in a meaningful way that lets people heal and live a fulfilling life. And we don't do it always. We can't do everything for everybody, but hopefully we can create communities that can help people transition, and hopefully them find their own community in their own way, and fill that, what was that atheist hole that they need filled, or whatever, agnostic hole, because
It's
it's
a
not a God hole, I'll tell you
dog-shaped
that.
hole.
It's a
It's a
dog-shaped
dog-shaped
hole.
hole.
I got a dog-shaped hole here. All right, so what else was I going to say?
Say the
Huh?
announcement.
Oh yeah.
Was it
So there's one minor thing we need to do here, and this is a big deal. So I'm going to turn it briefly over to David, and then I'll wind it up here. David, what do you got for us?
What is the big announcement? The big announcement is that we have reached our 1,000th therapist with the Secular Therapy Project. And as one of three and a fantastic team of vetting of those who are vetting the therapists who come in and do their applications. I love working with those guys. They're both amazing. But we have been hard at work and clearing people, and we've reached that 1,000, and we're just going to keep on going. And it's incredible. We've got a bunch of ideas what to go forward. So that's awesome.
And this is our 13th year. May of 2012 was when we officially started the Secular Therapy Project. We started working on it in 2011 on the software, but we announced it and released it on May of 2011. So this is literally our 13th birthday month here as well. So if you need good secular therapy help, go to seculartherapy.org and register as a client. And if you know a therapist that's might fit our criteria, you can find the criteria right there on our website where it says register as a therapist. You can hit that button and just read what those criteria are, and send therapists to us. We'd like to have another 1,000, but we don't want to wait 13 years to do it. We want to get them a lot faster. Right. And we want Dave to have to work for his money. I mean, he gets paid all this RFR money, and he's been kind of lazy now. They're only processing like 20 a month or something. We need to up the ante here.
We need more.
Yeah, right. I really have. I think I caused this myself, but and next week, let me give you the full title. Kara, I didn't tell you the full title. I'll be talking about masturbation, porn, and your sex life. All three subjects. We're going to kill it next week. I'm pretty sure you'll like it. And if you don't, you're still going to be scandalized. How's that?
Ooh.
Back to you, Kara.
All right, challenge accepted. You're either going to like it or you're going to be scandalized. But either way, join us next week. Same bad time, same bad channel.